44. The light pulled and Riley followed it. Despite the shivering, she could still feel sweat trickling between her shoulders. The pain in the back of her skull had dulled somewhat, but now seemed to shred throughout her body. She felt dizzy and disoriented from hitting her head on the stage, the sound of her steps echoing long after she'd taken them. The cut on her hand had inexplicably opened again. She could feel the fresh blood oozing beneath the bandage. She still wasn't sure what had happened back in the auditorium, if the ghost of the girl who haunted these halls had meant to hurt her, or if she had only been Riley fainting and tripping over her own feet. An accident. Heather Longmiller had died when she was only Riley's age, but her ghost didn't haunt the road where her life was taken, or the house where she grew up. It was here, Northridge Middle School, had returned to the place specifically. It was here because it wanted something. Pictures of Paris and Barcelona greeted Riley as she turned into D Hall, the armpit of the school. Quieter and less crowded during passing periods because nobody stashed their stuff here. These lockers hadn't been used in 30 or 40 years. She moved cautiously. Every third or fourth step, she'd swing the flashlight right or left, the every excess movement to beam shut off until she pulled it back to center, keeping her on course. The message was clear. To turn around and go back. To auditorium, to library, to the front entrance. Would mean staying in the dark. Be brave, Riley whispered again, talking to herself just so she could hear a voice, any voice. But don't be stupid, she added, inside her head. Halfway down the hall, the flashlight blinked off again, straighting her in the darkness. Riley wondered if she'd taken a wrong turn and gone too far. Maybe the whole thing was a trick to get her away from Max, to get her alone. Maybe Heather really did intend to hurt her somehow. She stopped and panned slowly, right to left. When the beam came back on, its eye illuminated the rows of lockers beside her, focused on a black and silver plate with the number 1237 stamped on it, into it. The locker had a scratch down its middle, cutting through the yellow paint to reveal the silvery and seal underneath. She never noticed it before, the scratch, despite walking through this hallway every day. Riley looked back the way she came and called out Max's name, wondering if maybe he'd followed her, but his voice wasn't in her head. She held her breath and placed her bandaged hand against the cold metal, right above his jagged scar. Immediately, the hallway erupted in whispers, just like the ones she heard before, multiple voices overlapping with one another, so it was impossible to tell which direction they were coming from. Riley instinctively cut her eyes and put her hands over her ears, but it was no use. The voices were inside her head, speaking only in fragments. Did you hear? What happened? An accident. So sad. She was so weird, kind of pathetic. She left last year. Trashed the school. Billy remember. Some kids, not me, used to tease her. She had no friends, call her names, except for one. Then she moved away. That girl. Never saw her again. The crazy one. Totally flipped out. She got kicked out. How could I forget? Put a hole in the wall. Kind of a freak. Put a hole in his hand. I want you. I know that girl. What's her name again? To think. Just can't remember. About what? That poor, poor girl you've done. Click. Riley dropped her hands and opened her eyes. The voices were gone, and locker 1237 was open, just a crack. Switching the flashlight to her bandaged hand, Riley inched the locker door open further, its old, unused hinges groaning in protest. She tensed, ready to slam it shut again if something jumped at her, but there was no boogeyman lurking inside. No piles of bones or grinning skulls. There was nothing, in fact. No discarded jackets or magnet-backed mirrors. No half-peeled stickers of some old pop star or discarded candy wrappers. The locker was empty. Riley stood on her tiptoes and brushed her hand along the top shelf just to be sure, coming away with only dust. Nothing to see here, and yet this was where the light had led her. Just as she thought was about to shut the door, the flashlight bulb started to glow brighter, the light exploding into new intensity. The metal handle grew warm, then hot, causing Riley to drop it, shaking out her fingers. The flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning until its beam was fixed back on the open locker, the light fading back to normal. Riley bent down to take up the flashlight again. That's when she saw it, in the circle of light crammed into the underside of the bottom shelf, wedged into the curled metal lip that hid the screws holding the shelf in place, a packet of folded pages, tucked toward the back so that anyone looking straight on would easily miss them. You'd have to know where they were, or someone would have to show you. Riley glanced down the hall one more time. Then she crouched down and tugged the papers free, careful not to tear them. They were obviously notes, like the kind kids sometimes still pass when they were afraid to take their phones out in class, except those were usually no more than 4 or 5 sentences long. These looked more like letters, written on blue lined paper and carefully folded into neat squares. There were 5 pages in all. The top one was composed in misty cursive, most like the sloppy signature Riley had learned to forge. Riley unfolded the packet, careful to keep all the pages in order, and focused her light. She bit down on her lip, already anticipating, with a kind of stomach-souring dread, what she would find written there. The first letter began, Dear Max. 45. The first time she read it, it pissed her off. Only later did she realize how much it hurt, how deeply it cut. The note handed to her by Tyler Coles, given to him by Taylor Rogers, given to her by Emily Saunders, Riley's best friend. No, not best. Hadn't been best for a while. Ever since Emily started volleyball, meeting that group of shiny new girls Riley didn't want to hear about, but did anyway. That was followed by further trampling on the unwritten codes of friendship that the two of them had been drafting since the day they met, picking Sophia Shara as her lab partner, sitting in a different spot at lunch, responding to Riley's questions with increasingly short sentences. Over spring break, they had hardly seen each other, even though both of them had stayed in town. Every one of Riley's invitations to hang out parried with some excuse. Sorry, running errands with my mom, food with family, dinner with family friends, headache, think I'll just sleep in all afternoon. Riley had been tempted to stalk her, to bike the 4 miles to Emily's house and hide in her bushes, peering through her window to see if she was ever telling the truth. But she resisted. That's not what best friends do. Not best, but still good. At least okay. Until the day Riley unfolded the note Tyler handed to her to find Emily's pristine print marching across the page. The preamble was friendly, or at least polite, a velvet glove stretched over a 20-pound sledgehammer. You are nice, it said, which Riley knew wasn't always true. And funny. And cool. You've been a good friend. Last part was mostly true, she hoped. But then the glove came off. There was no paragraph break. No chance for Riley to catch her breath. But I feel like we were drifting apart. She meant she'd be drifting apart. And maybe that's a good thing. In no way was it a good thing. How could it be a good thing? From there, it just kept coming. I feel like we have different interests. I still think we can talk and hang out sometimes. I think you should try to make some new friends. And then, thanks for understanding. Ellie read the note 3 times, each pass causing her to fidget more and more in her seat. She tried to make eye contact with Emily, but her former best friend had her own eyes squared on Mrs. Zeitner, who was reminding the class how superlatives worked. Sad, sadder, saddest. Big, bigger, biggest. Riley's cheeks flared, her fingers clenched. She wanted to hit something, to stand up and kick over her desk, to find something fragile and smash it into 1,000 pieces. She wanted to scream. Crappy, crappier, crappiest. She'd been dumped, replaced by the girls in the volleyball team, on the volleyball squad, by the boys Emily sometimes flirted with, even though that she was terrible at it. Riley wasn't enough for her anymore. That's what the letter said. Sometimes something comes along that's better than what you got, or at least it seems that way. And as this new thing rises to the top, it inevitably pushes everything else down a rung. Best, better, good. And then whatever's below good, whatever's sitting there at the bottom. Fine, Riley thought. That's what she wanted. She crumpled the note and stuffed the wad into her backpack. She avoided Emily for the rest of the day. It wasn't hard. Emily clearly wanted to be avoided. That night, Riley sat at her desk in her room and uncrumpled the note, reading it one last time. She promised herself she wouldn't cry, and she held to that promise, tearing the note into 100 little pieces instead, enough so that she could no longer make out any of the words. Then she took the pieces to a window and dumped the confetti over the edge, watching a few scraps get caught in the rose bushes below, already in full bloom at the prospect of summer, while the rest drifted across the lawn like snowflakes, going, going, gone. 46. These letters told the rest of the story, everything that Max didn't. Maybe not the hows, but at least the why. It wasn't a horror story, though there were parts that made Riley shiver. There were other parts that made her heart ache. But this wasn't just about the bullying at school or the troubles at home. This was a story about a girl who grew detached from the world, a girl who seldom smiled and saw no reason to fake it, a girl who stood a pace apart in the choir and sang mostly to herself, a girl who struggled to make a connection with those around her, except for one, the boy who she'd known since elementary school, the boy she grew up with, who waited for her by her locker and sat with her at lunch, who walked home with her from the park after baseball practice and gave her her first awkward kiss underneath the bleachers by the tennis court, though the letters didn't say it was awkward, not in the least. The boy's name was Maxwell, but everyone called him Max. The girl's name was Heather, but people called her other things. Some people. She told herself she didn't care what they thought or what they said. It didn't matter, because she had him, and he was enough. Sometimes it only takes one person to see you for who you really are. The notes all started Dear Max. Then they were all signed Love Heather. In between there were promises and proclamations that she would always be there for him if he needed her. He was the only one she could talk to. He was the only one who understood everything she was going through. There were mentions of others, parents, teachers, students, but they were always on the outside, at best absent or oblivious, and at worst, Riley had already seen them at their worst. It was the two of them against the world, Heather and Max. What up until it wasn't? Handwriting on the last sheet of paper was much neater than the rest, the cursive unhurried, no cross-outs or do-overs, as if it had been recopied to ensure that there was no mistake. The note was so much shorter than the others, though it just started just the same. Dear Max, I know you told me to stop writing, but I promise this will be the last time. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I made things hard for you. I didn't mean to hurt you or embarrass you. I care about you, more than I think you realize. I don't want to see you unhappy. So if it's really what you want, I promise I won't bother you anymore. Love, Heather. Riley read this last letter twice, the others already piled on the floor by her feet. It was as if she was reading it for a third time that her voice in her head interrupted her. You found them. Riley arced her light to see the small, dark blob hunched at the end of the hall. She hadn't heard him coming. He didn't seem interested in getting too close. They're yours. They're not mine, Max insisted. They're addressed to you. That was a long time ago. I gave them back to her. I didn't think I'd ever see them again. He sounded curious and wary. Riley gathered the rest of the pages by her feet, holding them out in a tight fist. Pages full of memories, of time spent together, of secrets shared, held hands and broken hearts. I thought you said you were just friends. We were just friends, Riley insisted. Then we weren't. He made it sound so simple, but Riley knew it was never that easy. There was no such thing as a clean break. There was always something left behind, hundreds of little pieces. You pushed her away. Nancy's voice crept back into her head, suddenly defensive again. No, it's not like that. You don't understand. I tried. You abandoned her. I was there for her when nobody else would be, but I couldn't be the only one. You don't know what it was like, what she was like. She was always there. I couldn't breathe. It was just too much. I know I made things hard for you. Riley shook her head. She needed you. You needed help, Max countered. So why did you help her? The voice practically exploded in Riley's skull this time. Why me? What about her parents? What about all those kids who called her names? The ones who teased her in the locker room, who moved their bags so she couldn't sit next to them on the bus, laughed in the cafeteria, whispers in the halls. Not the only one who ever hurt her, Max said. No, Riley thought, just the only one she really cared about. In all her father's stories, the ghost always came back to haunt the living, driven by memory and longing, attached to the world by sorrow or regret. What if a spirit could haunt another spirit, holding it prisoner? What if the dead could haunt the dead? It's not fair, Max continued. Why should I have to pay for what everyone else did? Riley looked down at the pages in her hand. The written account of Heather Miller's last year at Northridge Middle School. The last year of her life, the only evidence of what she'd been through, offered up to the one person she was sure would understand. She promised not to bother him anymore. They were at the end, and yet here they both were. You should burn them. Riley blinked at him. What? Those letters. There's something about them. Can't you sense it? Just seeing them, being this close to them, I can feel them drawing me in, pulling on me, holding me back. He was right. Riley could sense something about them. Maybe not in the same way Max could, but she understood that there was a power in the story they told. Besides, Heather was the one who led her here. Riley was meant to find these letters. There must be a reason. You have to burn them, Max insisted. Get rid of those memories, of everything that happened here. That must be what she wants, to take away the pain. What do ghosts have to be afraid of? And what will happen if I do? Riley asked. Max didn't hesitate. Then maybe we can both go home. 47. A ghost can take many forms. Laughter in the room, writing on the wall, a slamming door, a flower that never loses its petals, a whistle that comes to you as you're falling asleep. Some ghosts talk to you directly, taking on visages frightening or familiar. Others find different ways to make their presence known. The flicker of a bedroom light, a howl of wind like a plea for help, your own name whispered in the dark. Something the spirit's will is manifested in a particular object, something familiar, a fireplace, a wicker basket, a pair of glasses, a packet of notes. Though the objects themselves aren't mundane, the memories they carry give them power. They are anchors, tethering the spirit to the world of love the living. Burn them, smash them, destroy them, and you negate that power. You break the bond. You set them free. Hopefully, Max added. You aren't sure? Riley asked, but Max only knew how he felt when he saw those pages again. Their mere presence tormented him. Max was stuck here, he said, because of things that happened too long ago, things that should finally be laid to rest. These letters are the key to unlock the door. Riley was more than ready to unlock the door, which was why she found herself standing in Mr. Boredom's room, the place where this all started, for her at least, sweeping the walls with her flashlight, pausing momentarily on the supply closet door, still slightly ajar. Not like she left it. The thought of all the hatchet-scented frogs still sealed up in their plastic bags, imagining them all getting free, hopping after her with their bellies split and their entrails dragging behind them, and choked down another upsurge of Miss Lang's M&Ms. It's okay, Max said. You're not alone. We do this together. Riley looked at him sideways, wondering how many times he told Heather the same thing or something like it. She wondered what made him stop saying those things. Maybe, like Emily, he just moved on, found new friends. Maybe standing up for Heather Longmiller, being the only one, just got to be too hard and couldn't take it anymore. Sooner the better, Max prodded. The Bunsen burner sat on the lab counter at the front of the room, right beside Mr. Barnum's desk. She'd seen him use it before at the start of the year. It was only the one. Middle schoolers couldn't be trusted with methane or fire, let alone the combination of the two. But Riley had paid attention when Mr. Barnum explained the safety precautions anyway, connecting the rubber tubing to the glass valve and then to the intake on the burner, checking to make sure everything was sealed tight. Wouldn't want to accidentally blow up the school, he said, earning him groans of disappointment from the class. The flint striker, a rusty-looking device that seemed like something from the Civil War, creating just enough of a spark to ignite the tiny stream of gas emitting from the burner's mouth, blooming with a bright blue flame. The top gas valve was there in plain sight, but there was a secondary safety valve in the locked cabinet underneath the marble counter. Riley knew exactly where the spare keys were kept. Lift me up, Max insisted. She put her hands on the floor and let the frog climb into them. If he was cold, she didn't feel it. There was no warmth in her hands either. She thought back to the lake and the way her feet had gone numb. There was something to be said for not feeling anything. Holding me with your bare hands, I guess you're not afraid anymore. Riley snorted. Only that were true. She set the frog gently on the table by the sink with its collection of eye washes and soaps, and set down her flashlight as well, propped so that she could better see what she was doing. Riley pulled the stack of folded letters from her pocket, just a few pieces of notebook paper. Maybe there was something special about them at all, and she just wanted to believe that this would work. That these words, were the only thing giving Heather her power over her, over the school, over Max. I don't know, Horatio. If he meant her getting out of here, it was worth a shot. She set the packet of letters on the table before bending down to unlock the cabinet, finding the gas valve clearly labeled in Barnum's writing. She twisted it twice around and then opened the one on top as well, checking first to make sure the tubing to the burner was secure. She grabbed the flint striker from the tub with the beakers and glass stirrers. We should hurry, Max said, the echo of his voice in her head taking on an edge. Riley stopped and listened. From what she didn't know. More laughter, more sobbing, the turning of knobs, the scrape of chairs, the creak of a door. But she heard nothing. No sign of the spirit who had written these letters so many years ago. Only the pages themselves and the memories they held. Memories of a girl who couldn't seem to let go. Just do it. Burn them. Mr. Barnum had said that a Bunsen burner reaches temperatures of 1500 degrees Celsius. Enough to cremate a body, he added. Enough to burn through skin and bone. Ashes to ashes. Riley held the top of the striker above the burner's mouth. She tried 4 times to light it, then she dusted the valve on the burner itself. On the fifth strike, the spark caught with a quiet whoosh, producing a burning blue teardrop flame no bigger than her fingernail, barely enough to provide a second sliver of light in the deepening darkness of the room. Riley took up the pages and unfolded them again. Her eye caught the signature at the bottom. Love, Heather. That's how she ended them, even the last one. Even when she was letting him go, there was still that hope, that connection, that need. Riley hesitated. She wants you for something. That's what Max himself had said. The yearbooks, lockers, the gym, the shattered mirror, everything had led Riley to this. But why? Why not lead her straight to the letters to begin with? Why would Heather put her through all this, making her relive the experiences that had haunted her, feel the pain and embarrassment she felt? What was the point of it all? Max sensed her hesitation. What are you waiting for? We have to do this. It's the only way. The only way, Riley repeated in her head. The pages were only inches from the fire. Max was right. If he destroyed them, there would be no more record of what Headlong Miller had gone through that year. The year her picture vanished from the yearbook. The year she was teased and tormented, slipping deeper and deeper into isolation and sadness. Was that how you set someone free? By erasing their memory? By forgetting what's been done to them? Was that really what Heather wanted? Was that why she was here? Ellie took a step back, away from the flame. Max's vessel hunched in the yellow halo of the flashlight, eyeing her. His voice erupted in her head. What are you waiting for? Just burn them already. Don't you want to go home? Yes, of course, more than anything, even though her mother was probably still at work, changing the bandages and bedpans, and her father was out on the rails, sprinting ahead into the stretch of black fog that his headlights couldn't reach. She wanted to be there when they came home, wanted to be with them, to talk to them, tell them she was sorry for acting out, for getting into trouble sometimes, but also to tell them how hard it was, that you couldn't always just float above it all or put it all behind you. She hoped they would listen. She thought they would. After all, everyone needs someone to hear them, or else how do you even know that you matter? How do you know that you even exist? Letty set the pages gently back on the counter, far from the flame. She shook her head. I don't think this is right. The frog took a small jump toward her. Please, Riley, Max pleaded. I need you to do this. For me. For us. I can't be stuck here forever. I told you, it's torture. You read the letters. You know it wasn't my fault. Don't you see? I don't deserve this. She did see, and it wasn't fair. Max Trotter wasn't the one who bullied her in the locker room or mocked her in the cafeteria. His laughter wasn't part of the chorus that haunted Headlong Miller while she was here. He was the only guilt. He was only guilty of letting her go. Do it, Max pressed, his peace changing to commands, his desperation shifting to anger. Then we can both move on. Forgive and forget, but you could do one without doing the other. Riley hadn't even heard Heather's name until today. This girl who had gone to the same school as her, the girl who had died so young, this girl who felt trapped, alone, rejected, who just needed someone. Riley stepped away from the burner and frowned at Max. I'm sorry, I can't. Has another way. There is no other way. I thought you of all people would understand, that you would help me. Riley froze. What do you mean, I would understand? Forget it, Max replied. It didn't make no difference anymore. You're just like her. Your father blinked once slowly, his throat bulging as letting out a sigh. Then suddenly collapsed on the table, its body deflated, legs splaying out beneath it, the spirit that possessed it abandoning it, leaving only an empty shell. But not gone. Max was still with her. His voice rang sharp and clear in Riley's head. If you won't do it, then I will. 48. Ghosts have the power to manipulate the physical world. Riley had learned that firsthand, and some ghosts are more powerful than others. Max knew what he was doing. Riley felt a tickle like a breath on the back of her neck before a current of air picked up the stack of letters she'd set on the counter, scattering them. Pages shot upward and then fell back down like maple leaves, all except for one, which hovered for a moment above the blue tip of the burner, suspended there as if held by an unseen hand. She recognized it just before it caught. It was the last letter, the one that said, I'm sorry. The blue tip burned bright orange, and as the old paper caught fire, the flame quickly curling the edge of the note. Riley screamed and reached for it, bringing her hand too close and singeing her thumb, but managing to snatch the page, slapping at it with her forearms, smothering the flames against the stone counter, the charred edges leaving gray flicks on her shirt sleeves. The shouting in her head came from everywhere at once, but like the laughter in the cafeteria, like the shouts in the gym and the whispers in the hall, but all the same voice this time, all Max's voice. I don't deserve this. Let me go. Another rush of air in the otherwise stifling room, and the letters lifted again, save for the half-burned one still clutched tight in Riley's hand. Another letter brushed its corner against the Bunsen burner's fiery tongue, just enough to ignite it. Only this time, the page continued to drift, the flame spreading as it floated to the other side of the counter. Riley reached for it with her free hand but missed. Cursing, she circled around the counter, scrambling toward the burning page and leaving ashes on the floor. But as she stepped toward it to put out the flame, one of the stools at the adjacent lab table toppled in front of her, catching her across her shins, causing her to stumble and fall, smashing onto the cement floor. I won't let you stop me, Max cried. Riley's grunted, Riley grunted, ignoring the jolting pain in her forearms and knees, crawling over the stool to the burning page, slapping at it with her bandaged hand. The raw white blister already bubbling up on her thumb made her blink away tears as she scrabbled to her feet. You can't save her, Riley. Neither of us can. What's done is done. He was right. She knew she didn't have the power. But there was one thing she could do. She could show Heather Longmiller that she wouldn't be forgotten. She could show her that she wasn't alone. Leaning across the table, Riley reached out with her burned hand and grasped the gas valve on the counter, twisting as hard as he could, but the knob wouldn't budge. The same force that had shut the window and the doors seemed to be working against her now. Stop it, Max, she growled. She twisted it as hard as she could, but the burner continued to spit its steady flame. The pages fluttered back up into the air again. Riley snatched them for them in the dark, clawing for them, hovering just out of reach. In her head, Max continued to rage. You're just like her, he repeated. I should never let you out. I should have never. Suddenly, Max's voice was cut off as the door to Mr. Barnum's room slammed shut. The exact same moment Riley's flashlight blinked out. Her spine stiffened. Temperature dropped perceptibly, so much so that Riley could see the mist of her own breath in the meager glow of the burner's flickering flame. She felt a tremor in the floor that vibrated through her whole body. The stools began to rattle on top of the tables, the windows shaking in their frames. Max screamed. It was truly a tortured, mournful sound, and Riley felt herself stumbling backwards, pushed by some unseen hand into the table behind her own hand slipping off the valve. Then, just as suddenly, everything around her grew quieter and still. But Riley knew. She could feel the shift, the sudden pull. She could sense it in her gut and even deeper, down in her bones. The ghost of Northridge Middle School was right beside her. 49. She was here. Not in a flash or fragment of a painful memory, Not in shouts swirling around the gym or a declaration written backward in the bathroom mirror. Not in a slamming locker door or a shard of shattered glass. Her spirit was here, a nearly physical presence, hovering close. Riley could sense her, like the thickness in the air on a humid day, a thing that surrounds you, permeates you, so much so that it felt as if the quick, frantic breaths Riley took were somehow tinged with the girl's essence, taking her in, absorbing her. Heather didn't speak. She didn't weave words inside Riley's skull the way Max did, but she showed Riley something, just a flash, a vision, maybe much like the ones Riley had glimpses before. She saw a girl locked in a dark supply closet all alone, screaming and pounding on the door, twisting a knob, cursing and crying, desperate to get out. The girl pounds and kicks, she pleads and shouts, she cusses and spits. She feels angry, she feels betrayed, she feels lost and alone. There is so much confusion, so much doubt. Part of her thinks she deserves it, being shut out, left behind, that she has somehow brought it all on herself. Part of her feels that whole world is set against her. She wishes she was somewhere else, wishes she was someone else. Mostly, though, she's afraid. Afraid of being stuck in this place forever. Afraid that no one will ever try to find her. She's afraid of the dark because she doesn't know what waits for her there. She's afraid of what will happen there because she doesn't know how long she can hold her breath each day. She slaps and kicks and curses. She rages and lashes out with the hope that someone will notice. And then, at last, there's a flicker of light. The girl opens her eyes wide. I know, she says. I see. The door opens. Riley blinked, the vision gone, the contours of Mr. Barnum's room revealing themselves again. Across the desk, the valve feeding the burner began to turn, twisted by an unseen hand, the blue flame growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. Riley stood there, paralyzed, watching the light vanish, and for a moment there was nothing. The heaviness in the air was gone, leaving only darkness and silence. Then out of that darkness she hears two voices, both of them familiar, one inside her head and one outside it. The first says, "Thank you." Second calls her name. Couldn't tell. 50. She couldn't tell if the voice was real or not until she saw her. And even then she had her doubts. Emily Saunders had been Riley's friend once. Good, better, best. But they weren't. Now the same girl who had helped drag Riley into the supply closet, or at least stood by and watched, stood in Mr. Barnum's doorway. Riley? The flip of a switch and Riley was suddenly blinded, squinting through the flood of light at the other girl, one hand holding Riley's backpack, the other pressed to her mouth. Oh my God, did you just get out of there? Riley glanced at the supply closet, still cracked open. She tried to picture the scene from Emily's eyes. The girl she and her friends had locked away, standing in the dark, hand bandaged with napkins and duct tape, blood spotting her clothes, shoes sticking of vomit, loose papers scattered at her feet, and a dead frog splayed on the table behind her. But no sign of ghosts, no rattling windows, no writing on the walls. Riley and Emily were the only two souls in the room, at least as far as she could tell. It took a moment for Riley to process, to get her bearings. Emily had just said something to her. Did you just get out? Was yes or no question. But some answers only lead to more questions, and more, until you get to the ones you don't want to have answers for. The ones that can't be jumped out. Riley just nodded, afraid to speak, uncertain of what she might say. Emily's eyes went wide. Oh God. Oh crap, Riley. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I tried calling your house as soon as I got home. When you didn't answer, she didn't have a chance to finish because her mother, school secretary, suddenly appeared behind her, still dressed in the uniform she wore for her night job as a waitress, her mouth set in a circle of surprise at finding Riley Flynn right where her daughter confessed to having left her. Riley, Mrs. Saunders said in disbelief, then sharply turned to Emily, her tongue in a whip. Holy hell, Emily Saunders. What on earth were you thinking? You seriously locked Riley in a supply closet and left her there? Left behind, but not, as it turned out, forgotten. I can't believe you, Mrs. Saunders continued. I work here, for Christ's sake. You could get expelled for doing something like that, and you know that. You know that? Riley saw tears glazing her former friend's eyes as her mother chastised her. Emily barely managed to keep her head up, her whole body starting to wither under Mrs. Saunders' pointed stare. Riley coughed and had both heads turned. It's all right, Mrs. Saunders, she said hoarsely, doing her best to steady her voice. I'm okay. I just want to go home. Emily's mother's expression softened, the anger in her face melted into a weak smile. Oh, right. Absolutely, dear. Of course. Let's go. We'll give you a ride. She waved at the room with its open closet and tip stool. We'll just get this all cleaned up in the morning. Mrs. Saunders turned back to her daughter and started whispering, the two of them locking eyes, giving Riley enough time to gather the sheets of paper scattered along the desk floor, some of them flaking ash from their burnt edges. She hastily refolded them and stuffed them in her back pocket before grabbing the flashlight, clicking the button to make sure it was still worked, and so went off and on at her touch, just like it was supposed to. The dead frog she left on the table. The vessel was broken, its spirit gone. Neither Emily nor her mother said a word about it. Maybe they didn't even notice. Nothing to see there. Yet as Riley made her way to the door, she thought she heard something, a soft humming, haunting and melodic that and heartbreaking. The notes of a song she heard before, sung without accompaniment. Do you hear that? She almost asked, but she could tell by their expressions that they didn't. They stood in the hallway waiting for her, ready to take her home where she belonged. Of course they didn't hear it, Riley thought. Why would they? The song wasn't meant for them. 51. Light greeted her everywhere she went, as she soaked it up. All across the school, the electricity seemed to be working just fine again. The clocks ticking, bulbs burning, heaters humming, as if the building itself had been brought back to life. Riley imagined she could feel the air getting warmer with every step. They walked single file, Mrs. Saunders leading the way, her daughter, head hung, chin in chest, right on her heels. Riley brought up the rear, a few paces off, but close enough that she could clearly make out the collar of the hairband that kept Emily's ponytail in place, gray. Close enough, though. Close enough that, with a few quick strides, Riley could reach out and take Emily's hand if she wanted to. But she didn't. Not yet. They waited without a word. They walked without a word. Mrs. Saunders' stern footfalls, the preamble to a speech that she was probably composing in her head. Emily shuffling her steps. Riley taking glances behind her with every other breath, waiting for something to happen. A flicker, a rattle, a whisper. One point out of the corner of her eye, she thought maybe she saw something move. Just a twitch. And as she whispered Max's name, both Emily and her mother turned around. What's that, dear? Mrs. Saunders said. Riley shook her head. Nothing, sorry, she said. Trick of the light. Mrs. Saunders frowned. She really had stopped frowning, but she let it go. As they entered the main hall, headed to the front door, Riley saw the sign hanging on the wall. Welcome, Benvenue, Nayak, Yokoso, Salam. Her heart quickened. There, underneath the banner, sat the sculpture, its copper branches that had sliced open her hand, bent back into place, its heavy stone pedestal perfectly squared up with the wooden stand. Riley's eyes darted to the fire alarm, nestled snugly back into place as well, ready for the next prankster to give it a pull. Everything was right back where it belonged. It was as if Riley had never been there, as if she never tried to bust her way out. She thought of the basketball standing beneath the hoop in the gym, of the black button eyes she'd left dangling from the sockets of Mrs. Griswold's doll, of the smashed mirrors staring through the open curtains of the stage. Had all those things been fixed as well? Everything back to normal? She wondered about the puddle of vomit she'd left by the gymnasium door. She wasn't about to go and look. Ghosts have power. They can move stuff around, fool with the lights, hijack the phones, open and close doors. They can trap you, torment you, torture you. Can they also help you find things you've lost, leaving them in the basket by the sink? Well, but they can help you fix what's left been broken. Riley, you okay? Riley blinked and looked over at Emily, waiting for her by the front door, holding it open for her as if leaving the school was the easiest thing in the world. The fresh air tickled the hairs on Riley's arms. She filled her lungs with it, holding it as long as she could. The sky was studded with stars. She could make out the chirp of crickets over the electric hum of the lamppost. She thought of her mother sitting on the porch, waiting for her. She would see her soon. But as she walked through the door, Riley paused. She couldn't help but notice the mark, the small nick in the glass from where she tried to break through. Such a tiny thing. Barely a chip. Probably else would ever notice it. They wouldn't realize it was there, and even if they did, they couldn't even be expected to care what had caused it. But the but she would know. She would remember, and that, she hoped, was enough. Sitting in the Saunders car, pulling out of the parking lot, Riley felt a tear forming, just one. She let it slink halfway down her cheek, tracing a path like a pencil tip through a maze before wrapping it away. 52. Riley's father told horror stories and he told ghost stories. Sometimes they overlapped, but not always. The ghost stories, the real ghost stories, were always more sad than frightening. They haunted you in ways you didn't always expect. Like the story of the husband who always left a freshly cut rose on his wife's windowsill every year on her birthday, even though he'd been dead for the last 12 of them. Or the boy who froze to death in Stalingrad in 1944, but still tracked in snow every now and then, leaving size 4 boot tracks leading to and from his old abandoned house. Of the family of four who could be seen sitting on the docks at night, clothes sopping, waiting for their ship to arrive so they could finally get their luggage, which sat, along with said ship, at the bottom of the sea. Of the mother who still sang whispery, lulling lullabies to her son at night, even though he was pushing 40 and had two sons of his own who she never gotten to meet. But he never told her the one about the girl who died so young, her seatbelt unlatched, her whole body thrown against the windshield with enough force to snap her neck, or what she'd been thinking of the moment before impact, before the light turned and the car swerved, before the glass shattered and her spirit was wrenched away. But Riley knew. They were thoughts of the boy who used to hold her sweaty hand when nobody was looking, who talked to her past midnight on the phone and hid behind the bushes and waited for her as she snuck out of the house. The boy she thought she loved and was sure he had loved her back, if only for a little while. But that boy was thinking of her even now, now that she was gone. Or if he'd forgotten about her already. How had she been the only one to let him go there at the end? And now if she had to do it over again, she might have tried to hold on a little longer. 53. Finally, she was home. Mrs. Saunders had asked, in a way that sounded more like insisting, if she would want Riley to call her parents, to let them know where she was and to try to explain what had happened. Another apology was called for, she said, more formal one. The look Mrs. Saunders gave Emily told Riley that lots more apologies were on the way. Explanations would be harder to come by, however, and Riley wasn't interested in offering any. For all Emily and her mother knew, it had taken Riley almost 3 hours to figure out how to pick the lock and get out of the closet. They'd arrived just after she'd made her escape. That was one story, the easiest one, the one they'd already assumed was the truth. She could have corrected them, but then they might not have taken her home. They might have rushed her to the hospital or insisted on staying with her until her mother picked her up, thinking that she was hallucinating, in shock or just full out crazy. Riley wasn't even sure what she was going to tell her parents. She had already decided that any version close to the truth would be heard by them first, if at all. So she kept quiet during the ride and thanked Mrs. Saunders for driving her, promising she would call her mother the moment she walked through the door. She also promised to tell her parents that Mrs. Saunders, thoughtless and irresponsibly bully of a daughter, and her equally thoughtless bully friends did, because rest assured Emily would be marching down to Principal Wharton's office first thing in the morning to confess her crimes. To all of this, Emily offered not one word of protest. In fact, she hadn't said anything since getting in the car. But from Riley's vantage behind the driver's seat, she could see Emily barely holding back tears of her own. The Flynn's driveway was empty when they pulled up, the lights in the house all off, and Riley could tell by her frown that Emily's mother was fighting every parental instinct leaving her here. She offered a reassuring smile. I'll be fine, really. Thank you. Riley opened the door and slid out, her legs jellied, her head still pulsing, without asking or being told to. Emily got out of the car with her. I'll walk you up, she said. They went silent as they made their way to the porch. Emily waited for Riley to fish her key out of her backpack and unlock the door before she spoke again. Listen, Riley, she started, eyes on her toes, hand shoved into the front pocket of her Northwood sweatshirt. I can't even imagine what that must have felt like back there, being stuck in there like that. No, you probably can't, Riley thought. Forget it, she said, twisting the knob, just wanting to get inside to be someplace safe again, but Emily angled herself between Riley and the door, looking up now with glassy eyes. Just hear me out, she said. I suck, all right? I know it, and I feel terrible. I should have stopped them, but I don't know. I guess I was scared of what they would say, what they would think of me. It was stupid. I hate myself for it. I know you'll probably never forgive me for this, or for anything really, and honestly, I don't blame you. Riley thought about the letters nestled in her back pocket, their edges burnt, but most of the words and the memories they contained intact. Some things were worth saving. Besides, Emily had come back for her. Maybe that was enough. I wouldn't say never. Emily sniffled and swiped at her eyes. Then she nodded and gave Riley a quick hug that felt a little forced, but not completely unfamiliar. The kind of thing you could learn to settle back into over time. So you'll be okay? Riley considered it. It was too big a question. Would she be okay? Probably. Yes, not tonight. Or tomorrow. Eventually. Maybe. Once her head stopped throbbing and the cut on her hand had healed, once she'd had some time to come to grips with it all, but she saw the look Emily was giving her, full of guilt, but also genuine concern. The look one friend might give another. Riley offered up a tight-lipped smile. I will if you will. Wasn't a promise, but it was close enough. 54. First thing Riley always did when she came home was turn on the lights. Second was flip on the TV. The channel didn't matter. She just needed the noise. This time she didn't bother with the television, though. She wanted it quiet. She wanted to be able to hear the creak of footfalls on the wood floor. She wanted to know if there were whispers in the house. She stopped to listen. No voices, no laughter, no sobs. Just the buzz of the refrigerator and the sound of Mrs. Saunders' wheels crunching out of the gravel drive. Riley looked at the clock on the stove. 9:14. She'd been trapped in her school for only a few hours, but it felt like so much longer. She would say that it felt like an eternity, except she knew better. She was still in no position to say what forever felt like. Riley dropped her backpack by the door, her flashlight tucked in the front pocket where a dead frog had once hitched the ride, and then peered through the blinds to make sure the car was gone. Despite Riley's attempts to soften the impact, to insist that she was fine, she had no doubt Mrs. Saunders would still lecture Emily the whole ride home. She wouldn't be allowed to forget this one for a while. Deep in her heart, Riley hoped it wasn't too long. Nobody should have to pay for their mistakes indefinitely. Not when they've owned up to them, at least. She locked the door, slipped off her boots, and slowly made her way to the bathroom to properly clean up her hand, turning on every light as she went. The quiet was manageable, but the darkness was something else. She spotted the home phone hanging on the wall and knew her next step would be to go back to check the messages, see if Mother had called, and if so, to call her back and assure her that she was safe. Maybe even ask her to come home early so that Riley wouldn't be in the house all alone. Riley gripped both sides of the bathroom sink and stared into the mirror. She recognized the girl looking back at her this time. The split ends, the narrow, distrustful eyes, the jutting chin. But it wasn't the same girl that had slunk out of the house that morning. This was some other version, no one that had been lurking beneath her skin and blood and bones. She felt in the back pocket of her jeans for the packet of pages partially burnt. Probably just her imagination, but they still felt warm. A ghost is only as strong as memories that keep her here. Max was strong about what Heather Longmiller wanted. Some ghosts aren't looking to be let go. They are looking for something to hold on to, or someone. In a moment of darkness and a moment of desperation, Riley had made a promise that she would hold on as long as she could. Hopefully that meant at least one other soul was forgiven tonight. Riley thought about the last thing Max said to her as the flame went out, when he realized what she'd done. He didn't stick around for her to say, "You're welcome." Riley hadn't done it for him, though. In the bathroom mirror, the girl refused to smile, though the distance in her eyes was gone. Riley reached up with her bandaged hand and touched her cheek. The glass was cool against her fingertips, but didn't break, not this time. "I see," she whispered. She stood that way for a while, until the sound of tires pulling into the driveway stole her attention. It was still too early for her mother to be home. Perhaps it was Emily, come back for another apology, or maybe Mrs. Saunders decided she just couldn't leave Riley alone after all. Riley made her way to the front hall, arms crossed, heart pounding, listening for footsteps coming up the sidewalk. What she heard instead was a whistle, two long notes, like the signal of the train pulling to its final stops. She recognized this whistle. She knew what it meant. Riley held her breath, undid the locks, and opened the door. 16 months later. They had her surrounded. There was no escape. She was surprised at how tiny they were. Granted, some were spurting, a few almost as tall as her, even with 3 years between them, but most of them still had a long way to go. Maybe over the summer they would squeeze out another inch or two and surprise their friends, but most of them were going to feel like they were walking among giants, at least at the start. Tiny or not, it was fun to see their faces the moment they walked through the door and took in the sheer size of the place. Their eyes blown wide with terror and awe as they stared at the enormous hallway bustling with bigger kids. "Welcome to the next 3 years of your life," he told them. She remembered how she'd felt walking into the same school for the first time, seeing the sign on the wall. Despite its polylingual invitation, she'd felt anything but welcome. That's why she made sure to keep smiling now, even though she wasn't normally a smiley person, to help put the squirming ones at ease. Her paddling of noobs looked especially nervous as she herded them together in the gym. 3 boys, 5 girls, one pair potentially boyfriend/girlfriend, judging by the way their hands keep finding each other. That's what dating was in the 5th grade. Awkward looks and sweaty, fumbling hands. Just wait, she thought. She introduced herself, told them her name and her interests, and how she was on the girls' soccer team, JV because she wasn't that good. The president of the book club. We meet in the library every Thursday before school. Miss Lung usually brings donuts. She told them how she had recently had her own school orientation at the even bigger high school down the road, and how she'd survived that, and so they would survive this. Then she led them along the prescribed route, pointing out the offices in the auditorium. There's a talent show at the end of the year, the art room complete with its very own kiln, science lab, where they will probably try to make you cut up dead animals, but you can always refuse. He told them that if they were vegetarian, they would probably want to pack their lunch. In hushed tones, she gave them a description of the principal's motivational posters, though in all honesty, it had been a while since she'd been there. They might have changed. Afterward, she led them to the cafeteria and pushed stale cookies on them, amazed at how much sugar 11-year-olds could put away. One beanpole of a boy named Miles, age 4. It was supernatural. "All right, we've got 15 minutes before the final presentation. Does anyone have questions?" Miles, aka Cookie Monster, was the first to raise his crumbly hand. "Yeah, is it true that a teacher got caught vaping in class last year?" Of course, that would be the first thing someone asked about. It wasn't during class. It was during his free period. But yes, he did. He no longer works here. We all make mistakes, she thought. Eventually, one way or another, most of us pay for them. Anyone else? Several more hands shot up, the kids tossing out questions and homework requirements in after-school clubs as if she had any idea what the fall musical was going to be this year. They wanted to know who the mean teachers were. She was tempted to tell them that when it came to meanness, the teachers weren't the ones they had to watch out for, but she didn't want to scare them. Finally, a shy-looking girl whose tag name Letitia raised her hand. Is it true this school is haunted? Riley paused, taken by surprise, just for a moment, but she quickly recovered, smiling. Where did you hear that? The teacher crossed her arms. My friend Anna's a sixth grader here, and they she says there have been strange things, like people hearing things and stuff getting moved around with no explanation. Mostly after school's out, when most everybody's gone. She said it's been going on for a while, but nobody has any proof. Riley used one hand to scratch absently at the jagged white scar on the other. Well, what do you think? She asked. I think it's just a bunch of older kids making up stories to try and scare younger kids. Riley smiled. Yes, that's how it always starts. Stories, rumors, whispers in the hallway. You want to know the truth? They all nodded. Took a deep breath, carefully considering what she was about to say. Okay, the truth is, you got bigger things to worry about than ghosts. Trust me on this one. You got pop quizzes and cheer trials and 2 hours of cross-country practice 4 days a week. You got vocabulary tests and group projects she started ticking off her fingers. Art portfolios, band concerts, dances, zits, dress codes, bad hair days, worse hair days. You got your deodorant days, not to mention friends and parents and all their drama, plus, life as a teenager which you are all going to be whether you like it or not. I mean, honestly, who even has time to worry about ghosts? Several fresh faces stare up at her. Seven fresh faces stared up at her, taking all that in. But Letitia was undeterred. So wait, does that mean the school is haunted or not? Riley shrugged. There was no fooling this kid. She went with her second answer. I don't know, Horatio. Maybe not, maybe so. Letitia gave her a funny look. Somebody else said, Who's Horatio? Riley let her eyebrows stay arched for a moment. Then she clapped her hands together. All right, I think it's time to head up to the gym. Grab one last cookie for the road, and if you want, Anne. Riley saw Ghost Girl's hand go up again. Yes? Yes, sorry, one more question. Letitia looked around at her classmates as if debating whether or not to ask it, worried about what they might say, what they might think. But she didn't let it stop her. Does it get any better? I mean, I know it's middle school and all, but it can't be all bad, right? I had thought about everything she'd been through the last 3 years. Some things she'd made peace with, some she still regretted. One or two even kept her up at night, but she was still here, still standing. Riley glanced across the cafeteria and spotted her good friend with her own group of panthers in waiting. Emily caught her eye and waved. She realized she was hesitating. She turned back to the group and gave the inquisitive girl a warm smile. No, it's not all bad, she said. It does get better. Lizzie smiled back, relieved. That was all she needed. Just one person to tell her it would be all right. When Riley stood up, the girl tucked in tight behind her like a shadow, matching her step for step. As she walked, Riley started to whistle softly to herself. The girl, recognizing the melody, began to hum along.